At midday, let's get the latest on this morning's major news from Downing Street, now on BBC Two, with Joe Coburn and Daily Politics.
I have just chaired a meeting of the Cabinet where we agreed that the government should call a general election to be held on the 8th of June.
In the past hour, in a dramatic move, Theresa May has called a general election. We'll bring you the latest from here at Westminster. Reaction from all the parties and, of course, the best analysis. Westminster has been taken completely by surprise today with the announcement from the Prime Minister of an early general election that she had insisted she would not call. Let's listen to Theresa May and what she had to say just an hour ago.
I have just chaired a meeting of the Cabinet where we agreed that the government should call a general election to be held on the 8th of June. I want to explain the reasons for that decision, what will happen next, and the choice facing the British people when you come to vote in this election. Last summer, after the country voted to leave the European Union, Britain needed certainty, stability, and strong leadership. And since I became Prime Minister, the government has delivered precisely that. Despite predictions of immediate financial and economic danger, since the referendum we have seen consumer confidence remain high, record numbers of jobs, and economic growth that has exceeded all expectations. We have also delivered on the mandate that we were handed by the referendum result. Britain is leaving the European Union, and there can be no turning back. And as we look to the future, the government has the right plan for negotiating our new relationship with Europe. We want a deep and special partnership between a strong and successful European Union and a United Kingdom that is free to chart its own way in the world. That means we will regain control of our own money, our own laws, and our own borders. And we will be free to strike trade deals with old friends and new partners all around the world. This is the right approach, and it is in the national interest. But the other political parties oppose it. At this moment of enormous national significance, there should be unity here in Westminster. But instead, there is division. The country is coming together, but Westminster is not. In recent weeks, Labour have threatened to vote against the final agreement we reach with the European Union. The Liberal Democrats have said they want to grind the business of government to a standstill. The Scottish National Party say they will vote against the legislation that formally repeals Britain's membership of the European Union. And unelected members of the House of Lords have vowed to fight us every step of the way. Our opponents believe, because the government's majority is so small, that our resolve will weaken and that they can force us to change course. They are wrong. They underestimate our determination to get the job done. And I am not prepared to let them endanger the security of millions of working people across the country. Because what they are doing jeopardises the work we must do to prepare for Brexit at home, and it weakens the government's negotiating position in Europe. If we do not hold a general election now, their political game playing will continue, and the negotiations with the European Union will reach their most difficult stage in the run-up to the next scheduled election. Division in Westminster will risk our ability to make a success of Brexit, and it will cause damaging uncertainty and instability to the country. So we need a general election, and we need one now, because we have at this moment a one-off chance to get this done while the European Union agrees its negotiating position and before the detailed talks begin. I have only recently and reluctantly come to this conclusion. Since I became Prime Minister, I have said that there should be no election until 2020. But now I have concluded that the only way to guarantee certainty and stability for the years ahead is to hold this election and seek your support for the decisions I must take. And so tomorrow, I will move a motion in the House of Commons calling for a general election to be held on the 8th of June. That motion, as set out by the Fixed Term Parliament Act, will require a two-thirds majority of the House of Commons. So I have a simple challenge to the opposition parties. You have criticised the government's vision for Brexit. You have challenged our objectives. You have threatened to block the legislation we put before Parliament. This is your moment to show you mean it, to show you are not opposing the government for the sake of it, to show that you do not treat politics as a game. Let us tomorrow vote for an election. Let us put forward our plans for Brexit and our alternative programmes for government, and then let the people decide. And the decision facing the country will be all about leadership. It will be a choice between strong and stable leadership in the national interest, with me as your Prime Minister, or weak and unstable coalition government led by Jeremy Corbyn, propped up by the Liberal Democrats who want to reopen the divisions of the referendum, and Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP. Every vote for the Conservatives will make it harder for opposition politicians who want to stop me from getting the job done. Every vote for the Conservatives will make me stronger when I negotiate for Britain with the Prime Ministers, Presidents and Chancellors of the European Union. Every vote for the Conservatives will mean we can stick to our plan for a stronger Britain and take the right long-term decisions for a more secure future. It was with reluctance that I decided the country needs this election, but it is with strong conviction that I say it is necessary to secure the strong and stable leadership the country needs to see us through Brexit and beyond. So tomorrow, let the House of Commons vote for an election. Let everybody put forward their proposals for Brexit and their programmes for government. And let us remove the risk of uncertainty and instability and continue to give the country the strong and stable leadership it demands.
Theresa May having delivered that very dramatic statement that no one was expecting, except we were told that there would be a statement from Theresa May outside Number 10, but there was no government logo on that lectern, which was an indication that she might be calling an early general election. Well, joining me in the studio now to discuss this is former Conservative leader Iain Duncan-Smith, Shadow Energy Secretary Barry Gardiner and the BBC's political editor Laura Kunsberg. And before I get reaction from you two gentlemen, just take us through the hour before she walked those few paces from the black door at Number 10 to that lectern.
Well, Jo, just as the Prime Minister turned around to walk back in, this is a very significant turnaround from her, no question about that. For months and months have been speculation at Westminster, always killed off by her team, always killed off by senior ministers saying she doesn't want an election, we're not going to do it. Yet this morning, at around about 9:30, message from Downing Street, oh, there's going to be a lectern moment. Now, we know that lectern moments
are big moments.
They are huge moments, either a resignation, David Cameron did that to call the referendum, for example, and there was all sorts of speculation, as you can imagine. You know, this is the first day back from the Easter holidays. Everyone's full of vim and vigour, looking for something to do and to get going. So rumour mill goes into hyperdrive. Mysteriously, senior sources in government's phones were not being answered, texts were not being answered, and the message was you have to wait and see what the Prime Minister says. Just very shortly after 11 o'clock, one of my contacts said to me it will be a general election on June the 8th. 11:10 or so. She surprised us even coming out a little bit earlier than we had expected. She came out and confirmed that. But remember, she has changed her mind, if we're to believe her.
And there is an element of trust here, Ian Duncan-Smith. She has said repeatedly, as Laura has just explained, she wouldn't call a snap election. It would lead to uncertainty and instability. And now she's doing exactly what she promised she wouldn't, and she's calling that general election.
Yeah, I think it's at the end of the day, I think she was right. She said she reluctantly came to the conclusion that it was the time to call it. And I think it's a balance. All these things are a balance of decisions about where the greater instability lies. Do you try and press on with a small majority, trying to get through the biggest single thing that any government's had to do, arguably, since we joined the European Union? You've got the negotiations in the European Union to take place, where you need to have a very strong showing, you need to have a strong mandate. And the second part of it is domestically, both domestic legislation, but also the bill. And the bill, you know, I was here for Maastricht, and I have to tell you, the Maastricht bill, where there was no chance that we would ever be allowed to vote that down, that took ages to get through because every device was used. I know, because I used them.
And it was difficult because of a small majority.
And hugely,
isn't the reason
it's
the
an
polls,
issue.
Isn't
Exactly
the reason
right.
the polls over the last few days that have confirmed in her mind that there is an opportunity here? Labour is 20 points behind. That's a massive gap, not seen since the mid-1980s. That's the reason she's changed her mind.
Well, you know, like anything else, you want to know that you have a chance of having a strong mandate. So, you know, the polling. I thought the most important polling was not actually about party polling. The most important polling was one that came out that showed 69, nearly 70% of the public now want to just get on with it. So they don't really want to continue to discuss the Brexit issue, but they want to see the government make progress. And I think the key point that they don't get is the parliamentary mess that is likely to happen. And I think that's the bit. And she really does need to do this. A government, I have to tell you, I know what it's like with a government with a small majority trying to get something through as big as that. It's very, very difficult. If you don't have a strong mandate and a strong vote in Parliament, it makes it more and more difficult to get that stuff through the legislation process.
You can hardly blame Theresa May when you look at the polls, when Labour, no doubt, has been digesting those polls over the last few days, over the last few weeks and months. It is an ideal chance for her to capitalise on that and increase her majority and, at the same time in her statement, blame Labour, the Liberal Democrats, the Scottish Nationalists for their opposition to Brexit negotiations.
Well, Jo, she must be the first Prime Minister ever to begin a general election campaign with a U-turn. That's the first thing. And that's quite extraordinary, quite extraordinary. You say, well, she's blaming the opposition in Parliament for being so weak. And if we're so weak, why does she need a bigger mandate? If in fact she's saying that it's because of the chaos in the Parliament. Look, the key thing, and actually the key poll that came out at the weekend, I don't think was about the questions on the polling on the votes. I think it was on the policies. And every Conservative candidate and every Conservative canvasser will have to answer three questions. They'll have to answer, why is it that today the average earnings are 10% lower in real terms than they were in 2007? Why is it today that 1.8 million people are not being seen within 4 hours in A&E, when in 2010 that figure was 350,000? And why is it today that we have 200,000 fewer home owners in this country?
So you're
under
confident?
A Conservative
You're confident
government?
of winning this general election?
These are the policies that I am confident resonate with the voters out there.
All right.
And actually, the polls at the weekend showed that they did. What we've been saying about carers allowance,
Yes.
what we've been saying about free school meals for all primary school
All right, well,
children,
before we get
these
to the
things
policies,
are actually popular
before we
with
get
people.
to the policies, what about Labour's position on the general election? We've had a statement from Jeremy Corbyn's office, and they are saying they will vote in favour of the motion that is going to be put to the House of Commons to bring on this general election.
The sooner we can get rid of this Conservative government, the better. She says she wants to fight this on Brexit. And we know the shape of the Brexit that people like Ian want. It's a hard Brexit. It's a deregulatory Brexit. It's one that actually is turning this country backwards. And what we want to be able to articulate, and I think what the public actually want, is a positive Brexit that enables us, yes, to have the new relationships that we need with other countries around the world, but that still maintains the access and the movement of people that is necessary to keep our business wheels turning.
Laura, isn't there a danger of framing this general election, presuming obviously everything passes through, and it will if Labour is going to support it, and we'll come to that on the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. Isn't there a danger of framing it along the lines of Brexit?
Absolutely.
That the argument would be repeated, an argument that we've had.
Absolutely. And I think that was one of the reasons that was articulated privately by people close to Theresa May about not having a general election, is that they did not want to have an election all about Brexit. That was one of the arguments in the negative column for having a general election and waiting until the deal was finished in spring 19. You'd be clear of that by 2020. But I think maybe we can imagine it like that. You've had the pros in one column and the cons in another. The polling suggests that having the election would be extremely advantageous for the Conservatives. The state of the Labour Party, which has been in real turmoil in the last 12 months or so, as we know, and that's also been in the positive column. In the negative column, threat of instability. There's been the idea of going back on her word after she said that she didn't want to have an election. But at the end of the day, it seems that the political logic, the appeal of looking at polls that puts her standing so far ahead of Jeremy Corbyn, and the appeal of her having her own mandate is what has won out. And I think one particular reason for that is Theresa May, in a strange way, as we saw during the referendum campaign, is not one of those Tory politicians who got up in the morning to have an argument about the European Union. She's a Tory politician who's actually much more interested, really, in other things, particularly the domestic agenda.
And she was on the Remain side, of course.
She was on the Remain side, but often called a reluctant Remainer, or the submarine for trying to stay out of the debate. And she has always wanted to be able to achieve a lot on the domestic front too, whether that's grammar schools or changes to social care. The only way she would be able to do that and do anything controversial is with her own hefty majority, and this will be one of the factors that's pushed her.
Having her own mandate is obviously clearly important. What is amazing, particularly when you talk about Westminster and the gossip machine that it is,
I don't know what you're talking
about. God forbid, is how they managed to keep this under wraps and secret, because nobody knew.
Well, it's one of the features of Theresa May's team. First of all, she has a small circle of people that she trusts. Very, very small. That was her MO at the Home Office, and she's taken that into Downing Street, and she's sometimes criticised for that. But that does mean that they are able to keep things absolutely tight as a drum. And there's a fascinating anecdote in the new biography of Theresa May that's just come out by a journalist called Rosa Prince. Andrea Leadsom told Theresa May 2 hours before she was going to pull out of the leadership race last summer that she was going to do it. She gave her the courtesy of phoning up saying, "Oh, Theresa, you're going to be the PM, I'm off." Theresa May, according to this account of the events, didn't even tell her husband that within a couple of hours she was a dead cert to be moving into number 10 Downing Street.
Well, she bucks
now,
the
that's
trend,
quite a capacity for keeping secrets. Absolutely. But I think it does also tell us something about her, which is also a vulnerability.
Yes.
Ministers didn't know about this either. Ministers I've talked to this morning didn't know it until this morning.
So she hasn't
been
counselled by that many people where this is concerned.
A very senior minister who will be heavily involved in the election, you would imagine, told me a couple of weeks ago that there hadn't been a single conversation with the Prime Minister about having the general election. So a strength, being good at keeping secrets, is a great thing, but it doesn't mean that the Tory party, is very well prepared for this.
Or anybody else.
Or anybody else. Of course,
Laura
we always are.
We will let you go, because you've got weeks and weeks to fill now.
Yeah, I'll be back, Jo.
General election
Plenty to talk
coverage.
about.
Thank you very much for coming in. Ian Duncan-Smith, let's return to this issue of her changing her mind on something so fundamental. Was she wrong initially to rule it out? When she ruled it out repeatedly in endless interviews, saying it wasn't the right thing to do. Before you answer that question, let's hear what she said to our very own Andrew Neil on this subject.
When you do the deal, when it's clear the terms of which we'll leave the EU, why would you not take that to the country, either in a second referendum or go to the country in a general election and get the people to vote for the deal that you do? Why not?
Well, what I've said is that when we have the deal, there will be a vote in the UK Parliament. Of course, there will be votes in parliaments across Europe because there will need to be a ratification process. I believe that's the right way to do it, to say to the UK Parliament, this is your opportunity to vote for this deal.
You won't take it to the country.
But I'm confident that we're going to get a deal that is going to be good for the British people. The British people have basically said to us, go on and get on with it. We want to leave the EU, go out there, get the deal, get on with it, and that's what we're going to do.
Ian Duncan-Smith, she went back on her word.
Yeah, I think she said in the statement you saw earlier on, and I'm a little bit like her in this sense. I'm a reluctant convert to the idea of a general election, and I think she was too. I think the point was being made to her. 2 or 3 things have changed over the last couple of months. The first is that just getting that 4-line bill through demonstrated, I think, just how tough it's going to be to get this very complex set of legislation through. And it is really complex. As I say, I was there for Maastricht. This makes Maastricht look like a picnic. This is going to be very big, very complicated, very detailed. And the Lords is in a peculiar position.
Because you don't have a majority in the Lords.
Yeah, but we don't. The Liberals are disproportionately represented. 100 Liberal peers in the Lords, 9 members of Parliament. But the most important thing is the Lords will react to a strong mandate from a general election. They know when the game is up, and therefore they'll know their limitations. At the moment they've been able to argue, and we've heard this from the Liberals particularly, but also certainly from Labour, you don't have a mandate. You personally, Theresa May, don't have a mandate. You were not elected as Prime Minister. This government wasn't elected to see this thing through. There's been a lot of kind of let's have some kind of election. And I think she's reached the conclusion that actually, in a sense, there is a window of opportunity now to do this because France has got an election which won't complete probably till June, which means that while we have that election, there isn't going to be any great negotiation taking place until the French stuff. So practically, this window works. If you're going to do it, now is the time, not later. Now is the time to do it.
You talked about the policies in place, but looking at the polls, they'll increase their majority, the Conservatives, and it will make life much easier for Theresa May to push through the type of Brexit that she wants to see.
Joe, I admire Ian Duncan-Smith's attempt to spin what is clearly polling advantage into high principle. It's not. So let's not pretend it is. And you're right, the polls have had an influence in what she's doing here. But the point is it in the best interest of not just this country, but look at what is happening in the world at the moment? Is it in the best interest of the country when we have a 2-year window to negotiate this deal? Only 2 years.
But as Ian Duncan, nothing's going to happen while the German and French elections are going on.
That was an argument that could have been used before she triggered Article 50, and many of us did, but she ignored it. She said that the negotiations can go on. They aren't going to be able to go on now for 2.5 months as we have an election.
No, and will be going on.
I'm sorry, ministers will not be in control of those. They will be out on the stumps campaigning.
Honestly, the first stage of this is negotiation about how the overall political negotiations
let's talk about the negotiations.
Let's
talk about the negotiations a moment, because we were talking about polling and whether that is in the end what changed Theresa May's mind. Well, let's talk about it a little further with the psephologist John Curtice, who is in Edinburgh. Well, first of all, your reaction, John Curtice. A general election, June the 8th.
I have to admit I am very surprised. I, unlike Laura Kuenssberg, took the Prime Minister at her word that she didn't want to call a general election, and indeed, of course, was well aware that given the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, calling one is not that straightforward.
Well, you won't do that again.
Well, of course, indeed. But the truth is, of course, that actually the person who really has the decision to make is Jeremy Corbyn. Now, despite what Barry Gardiner has just been arguing, apparently Mr Corbyn has decided that the Labour Party is in favour of an election, and therefore we will have one. The truth is, if Mr Corbyn had said no, Mrs May could not have her election. So Mr Corbyn is also making a big decision today, as well as the Prime Minister.
Right, and what about the polls? What do they tell us at the moment? We've already discussed the headline poll, which is that Labour is 20 points behind the Conservatives.
Well, certainly some of the opinion polls suggest that Labour's position now is as bad as it has been at any time since the 2009, in the worst days of Gordon Brown's administration. But on average, if you take all of the polls, we're looking at a Conservative lead of around 15 points by about 42 to 27. And certainly that, if it were to transpire in the ballot boxes, would result in a substantial majority for the Conservatives. Though I think we should be somewhat careful about talking about a landslide. We should remember that these days, not only is Northern Ireland out of the frame so far as the UK-wide scene is concerned, but so effectively is Scotland, and I would be surprised if the SNP don't hang on to most of the seats north of the border. Therefore, any majority has to be manufactured in England and Wales. And dire though Labour's position is, it does have a lot of very safe seats. And therefore, getting a majority of 100, yes, possible. Getting a majority of the kind of 170s, for example, that Tony Blair got in 1997, that in truth could be beyond the Conservatives. And of course, what one does need to bear in mind, if the poll lead does begin to fall, let's say Jeremy Corbyn surprises us all and fights a rather effective campaign, and therefore the Tory lead goes down to 7, 8, 9 points, well, actually, Mrs May discover she doesn't have much of a bigger majority than she has already, and maybe on the way she's lost a few seats to Liberal Democrats.
But you can see the temptation that has been placed in front of her, despite what she has said, because Labour had been behind the Conservatives by a pretty substantial margin over a fairly long period of time. But it seems in the last few days something has crystallised in her mind and pushed her to do this U-turn, to change her mind, and surely it must be that massive gap.
I think you're totally right. The opinion polls clearly provide a very substantial temptation. I guess the interesting thing, however, is that what she hasn't done is to wait for the results of the local elections on the 4th of May. Because if you remember what Margaret Thatcher did in 1983 and 1987, when we were all speculating about, well, she's only got a year to go, when should she hold an election? In both occasions, she waited for the local election results, decided that they indicated that the Tories really were going to head for a general election victory, and then called an election. In fact, well, of course, we'll now be intensely looking at the results of those elections in England, Scotland and Wales, but the die will already have been cast.
What about voter fatigue? I mean, everyone has been taken by surprise, and Laura Kuenssberg mentioned that people won't necessarily be prepared in politics, but also they won't have been expecting it in the country. Will they thank Theresa May for this?
Well, I mean, clearly one of the things the opponents will use against Theresa May is the fact that, as you've just shown, repeatedly said, that she was opposed to the idea of an early general election, and certainly the opposition will try to use that to say, well, look, hang on, you cannot necessarily trust the Prime Minister at her word. Though I guess at the end of the day, that probably is not a promise about which voters are too concerned. Insofar as the election does focus on the issue of Brexit and continues to do so, given that we got a 71% turnout in the referendum, which is relatively high by today's standards, then I'm not sure we should be too concerned about the level of turnout. And certainly, I think we're going to see some reiteration of the arguments about Brexit and its merits and hard versus soft for much of this campaign. And the question is whether voters will feel that's sufficiently important in order to respond by turning up to the polling station.
John Curtis, thank you very much. Well, let's recap briefly. The Prime Minister has announced her intention to call a general election on 8th of June. What process needs to happen, though, before that election can take place? Well, the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, introduced under the coalition government and enshrining the timescale for elections to be held every 5 years, allows two main methods for calling an early election. The first would be if 2/3 of MPs backed a motion calling for one. That would be 434 of 650 Commons seats. This is the method Theresa May has said she will use, and that she will introduce a motion to Parliament tomorrow. The other option is if Parliament passed a motion of no confidence in the government and no other alternative government is formed within 14 days. If the Prime Minister fails to get the 2/3 majority required in the Commons to call an election, there are two other alternatives available. The Fixed Term Parliaments Act could be repealed, which would only require a simple majority of MPs to vote for it, a lower threshold than the Act itself allows for. Or the government could enact a new law, amending the Act and setting a date for the next election. Well, Labour this morning confirmed they will support the motion for an early general election, meaning it will pass with the 2/3 majority needed in the Commons. Their election coordinator, Andrew Gwynn, had told Andrew Neil last month that they would welcome it.
As an opposition, not wanting to be in opposition, wanting to be in government, should the government put forward a measure in accordance with the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, then that's something we would very seriously have to consider.
If the government was to issue a motion in the Commons for an early election, the Labour Party would vote for an early election.
Well, it would be very difficult not to, Andrew, because if the government wants to dissolve Parliament, wants a general election, we don't want the Tories to be in government. We want to be in government. We want to have that opportunity to put that case to the British people.
Andrew Gwynn, Labour's election coordinator, coordinated the campaign. You couldn't really say anything else, though, could you, apart from welcome a general election despite the polls? Otherwise, you'd be running scared.
Well, the nice thing is that we do welcome it. And actually, I think it's also that the government recognises that the Labour Party will support it. They've known that. We've made our position very clear.
Which is why, of course, she could go with confidence and actually call.
That's why she's been able to do it. What she has to, though, now work out is what is her pitch now to the British people. We have come out with 8 very clear new policies that are very popular. The opinion polls at the weekend showed that. We've come out with 8 very clear policies. The government actually is not running on a new policy agenda. What it's running on is a record that has not resolved the economic problems that the country faced, as they said they would. It has now precipitated a crisis within the health service. We've seen the BMA and the juniors doctors dispute. We've got a crisis in social care. We've got all these problems that the government has to actually now come out with manifesto commitments on, and there was nothing of that.
Well, let's put that to Ian Duncan-Smith
in her speech.
Because Barry Gardiner is right that Theresa May did frame that statement very much along the lines of the opposition parties are going to make it difficult in terms of the Brexit negotiations. You yourself have reflected on how hard it was during Maastricht. But is that what this general election is going to be about? It's not going to be about a domestic agenda on the sort of critical issues that Barry Gardiner has been talking about? Is it really only going to be serving what the Conservative Party seems to be interested in at the moment, and that is the Brexit negotiation?
Well, actually, the Conservative Party isn't that interested in the Brexit idea, and since it's done,
What?
the vote... Well, hold on. The vote has been taken, and we're leaving, and we've triggered Article 50. So that process is in place, and that's all about negotiation and discussion, and that's mostly now government going out doing this.
But if it was so straightforward, why is she calling a general election?
Well, this is exactly the point I want to make.
So it is going to be about Brexit.
No, it is hugely about domestic issues. The fact is she needs a mandate, that's her view, to both get the Brexit legislation through domestically, which is hugely an issue of numbers in Parliament, and the second element of it is there's a domestic agenda, and she wants to get that through.
Right.
And
What
she
is
wasn't
that? That
elected
wasn't
as
mentioned
Prime
in her
Minister.
statement,
Well, it's
though,
the
was
government
it?
agenda, which we've been announcing out from, the budgets, from the statement she made in Downing Street, from today. Today, for example, hang on a second. For today, for example, we talked about the business strategy, the industrial strategy. All of that are the things that she wants now to take forward.
But that's going to be
in the
secondary to
manifesto.
the Brexit negotiations.
No, well, they're all
isn't it?
part of it. I mean, the fact is, you're a government that deals both with issues to do with foreign policy as much as you do with domestic issues. And as Europe strides both of those, that also be part of it. But hang on, there is one really important point here. She wants a mandate to be able to govern with a government that's strong enough in numbers to get their legislation through after Brexit. Brexit changed everything, OK? The vote to leave the European Union changed everything. So the point she made today, I thought, was the most important thing, is the public now will face a choice. Do you want a government with a clear, strong leader, or do you want a government that is at war with itself, as the Labour Party is, led by Jeremy Corbyn, that most of his MPs don't want, and which has been foisted on them by the party at large, and maybe a coalition between a messy Labour Party and a Liberal Party that wants to reverse the vote on Brexit. And I think that's a legitimate position to be in.
Except, of course, Theresa May did say that she would be able to get a good deal for the UK, and on the basis of that good deal, then we could have the general election in 2020. So let me just come to Barry Gardiner, though, on that point. She did frame in her statement that it would be Labour propped up by the Liberal Democrats with an anti-Brexit tone to the whole campaign. Are you happy to be painted in that way? If you are then seen as the party, with the help of the Scottish Nationalists and the Liberal Democrats, as the party that's going to frustrate something that the Tories keep referring to as the will of the people.
Let's be clear. We are not anti-Brexit. We have clearly come out and said, now that the referendum has taken place, we are leaving the European Union. End of story, right? So let's absolutely kill that one. But Ian has said there that it's a weak Labour Party and a weak opposition in Parliament.
Well,
but
the polls seem to indicate that, don't they?
The Prime Minister is saying that the reason she's calling this is that she needs a bigger mandate because of all the problems that this...
The Lords, my friend, the Lords, you're overrepresented in the Lords and you know it, and you're going to frustrate
Don't talk over each other. Yeah. Barry, finish that point, please.
It's nice to be able to shout me down, but it shows the weakness of your position.
Save it for the Commons.
The point that I'm trying to make is simply this, and that is If we are as weak as Ian is saying that we are, then she doesn't need to increase her mandate in the Commons. You know that everything will go through the Lords eventually because the Lords will respect the Commons. They always do.
All right.
But the point here is she can't have it both ways. We can't be so weak that she needs a bigger mandate, or if she needs a bigger mandate, it's because she fears that we may be able to influence her legislation and her legislative programme in ways that she doesn't want. We want to see a softer Brexit, not the regulatory Brexit that she wants to take us down.
All right, let's get more reaction, because if you're just tuning in, Theresa May has announced that she is calling a general election to take place on June the 8th. She made the announcement outside Downing Street just after 11 o'clock this morning, to the surprise of everyone, it seems, in the past few minutes. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has been giving his reaction to the Prime Minister's announcement.
I welcome the opportunity for us to put the case to the people of Britain, to stand up against this government and its failed economic agenda, which has left our NHS in problems, which has left our schools underfunded, which has left so many people uncertain. We want to put a case out there for the people of Britain of a society that cares for all, an economy that works for all, and a Brexit that works for all.
Jeremy Corbyn there. Well, we're joined now by two journalists, Tom Newton-Dunn of The Sun and Paul Mason, who are both on a very busy College Green. Tom Newton-Dunn, your reaction, first of all, to the announcement?
I'm really surprised. Then again, I'm not the only one. So is everyone in SW1 at the moment. Not least because Theresa May said this was precisely what she didn't want to do, and there are huge amounts of good reasons for that. You know, not least, they haven't passed the boundary changes yet. That gives the Tories 20 more seats and takes about 20 off Labour. So why not wait till October 2018 for that? What does it say to the EU? You're going into a incredibly complicated renegotiation, technically not knowing precisely which Prime Minister is going to be sitting around that table. So all of this, as we well know, was precisely what Theresa May wanted to avoid. So the big question still remains, and your pundits have given some clues maybe, but why has she changed her mind? And to me, that's still not entirely clear. My best bet would be, on top of the Brexit problem she's already got, but then again she was aware of her lack of parliamentary majority for that months ago, would be the domestic legislation. So things like grammar schools, her reforms to corporate governments, even possibly her energy market reforms. She may not have had a majority for that amongst her own MPs. So perhaps that is a fairly good reason, and unspoken reason yet, why she wants to press the button on this.
Well, Paul Mason, your thoughts on exactly why she has changed her mind? Is it the polls that put Labour so far behind? Is it the domestic legislation that has been talked about in the studio and by Tom Newton-Dunn, and the difficulties that lay ahead with Brexit?
Well, I think there's a whiff of panic and incompetence in the decision, though I too welcome it. I think, it's not the polls, Labour 23, 25, 27, whatever you want to pick, that will be panicking Theresa May. It's the fact that she's kicked off the Brexit process, Article 50, without a plan, and on first contact with the opposition, which in this case is the EU27, finds that, lo and behold, the EU27 are prepared to absolutely destroy her negotiating position. So of course she needs a mandate. I hope she doesn't get it. I hope that the British people will give a mandate to Corbyn, to the SNP, to the Lib Dems, to engineer what I think inevitably most people in this country want, which is a minimal, soft, socially just format to Brexit. And I think Theresa may be about to find out that Turkeys just do not vote for Christmas.
Well, I mean, Tom Newton-Dunn, looking at the figures, if you remember them from the referendum, 48% Remain, 52% Leave. I mean, if this campaign does turn out to be a rerun, if you like, on that referendum, what's the best she can hope for, Theresa May?
Well, I mean, it will turn into a rerun of the referendum, perhaps referendum 2.0, because it's going to be what type of Brexit, and it really is unclear at the moment where the country stands on that. I mean, talking to a few Tory MPs since her announcement already, some of the West Country MPs are really unhappy about this, the Lib Dem facing seats in the Southwest. Remember, the Tories have their wafer-thin majority at the moment simply because they cleared out the Lib Dems from the Southwest in areas that are really quite Remain and have a strong Lib Dem vote. So I think you're looking at 15, 20 Tory MPs possibly in quite considerable trouble. So the gamble quite clearly is Labour is in such pieces at the moment. Theresa May would hoover up far more Labour MPs than the ones she maybe lose to the Lib Dems. But this is really unclear at the moment, which is why there is an element of risk to all this. Big
right,
element of risk.
but having your own mandate is the key, isn't it, Paul Mason? I mean, that was always going to be the difficulty for her, that things could be thrown at her as Prime Minister because she hadn't won a general election. And with both domestic policies and the Brexit negotiations, she will be stronger, won't she, psychologically, if she wins a general election on her own terms?
I think we need to see what those terms are, because of course you've now got the people on the Tory backbenches, including Mr Duncan Smith, saying that they want to use the so-called Great Repeal Bill to actually tinker with the regulatory situation in Britain right now. So, you know, the Tories need to come forward now with a manifesto, not just saying, hey, we're going to kickstart Article 20 and in 2 years' time we'll tell you what the outcome is. We need to now know what the Conservative hard Brexit programme is. And my prediction is that the majority of British people will reject it. Now, we need to find the organisational form for that to happen. I'm a big supporter of the idea of a progressive alliance between Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP and the other nationalist parties to prevent this kamikaze Brexit. We now have to scramble fast to make this happen, but I think we can.
What about the preparedness? I mean, just briefly, I know you haven't had much time to talk to MPs. I mean, it's only been announced in the last couple of hours. But, you know, what is the general impression and reaction that you are being met with at Westminster, Tom Newton-Dunn?
Well, they're stunned. I mean, we're all stunned, not least because the Prime Minister said this was precisely what she didn't want to do. And, you know, Paul was right to the extent that the Prime Minister will now be pressed by Labour to define precisely what type of Brexit she's going to go for, because the truth is she can't do that because she hasn't got a clue. She's got what she likes, she's got her best hope, and that's what she'll put to the polls. But you won't get any more detail on that. And, you know, things like enormous great issues like a new immigration system. You know, we had a barista visas debate over the last few days. We will not get any more detail on what immigration system the country will get.
All right.
Is my firm prediction over the next 4 weeks, or 8 weeks rather. So I think Theresa May's gamble is she, although no party is really prepared for this, she is just a tiny bit more prepared than Labour is, who really can't unite around anything at the moment. I'm sure Paul will probably agree with that.
All right, I'm going to stop you there, gentlemen. I'm sure you've got plenty of other people to talk to, but thank you very much for your thoughts today. Ian Duncan Smith, it's a gamble. It's going to allow a really hard Brexit, perhaps of the type that you would be a fan of, to go through if you win the general election.
I don't know what a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit looks like. I just know Brexit. And it's all very well for Barry and others to talk about hard versus soft. They don't know either, by the way. What you have is a set of negotiations coming up, and you want to get the best deal possible for the UK, and that's what she wants the mandate for, to make sure she is seen as strong as a leader at home, able to go and do those negotiations.
We're joined now by the Labour backbencher and Jeremy Corbyn critic, Neil Coyle. Neil Coyle, do you welcome this general election, and will you be supporting it?
Well, I think it shows that the Conservative Party is in disarray on this issue. Theresa May is trying to duck the issue of Brexit by having an election now before she gets to the point where the damage, or more of the damage, comes through, you know, after the final agreement.
And are you firmly square behind Jeremy Corbyn and the leader's office in this election?
Any Labour Prime Minister is better than any Conservative Prime Minister, in my opinion, and will do more for constituents like mine in Bermondsey, focusing on homes, jobs and the NHS. I know that Jeremy would make a better Prime Minister than Theresa May.
Even though you've been a very staunch critic of him over the last few years.
Well, the last few days have seen one private email I sent to Jeremy become the focus of office politics rather than the focus that it should have been on, which is, I was saying, we need a communications agenda that delivers on things like policing. And the police in Bermondsey do not have the resources they need in order to investigate all crime. Not focused enough on education, where we see in Southwark some of the biggest cuts coming through from this government. I want those to be the focus of our communications agenda. That's what I was asking for, and instead I got reported to the Chief Whip. I think all that nonsense will now end.
Right, although, oh right, you think which nonsense? The Labour Party leadership nonsense, as you would call it then?
The internal, you know, the silliness of reporting an MP to the Chief Whip for asking for a better communications agenda.
But isn't it the internal infighting in Labour that is not going to put you in a very good position in this general election?
Well, I'll be fighting as you know, the Labour MP for Bermondsey Southwark, and I hope my electors don't have too short a memory. Remember that there was a Lib Dem before who voted for things like the bedroom tax and hiking tuition fees, didn't support equal marriage. I think those issues will still have salience with many voters.
Well, there's nothing like a general election to focus MPs' minds, of course, but with the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, it does need a two-thirds majority of MPs to vote it through to call for this general election. I presume you will be voting in favour of it.
There is also the option of a vote of no confidence and then having an option for a different Prime Minister altogether.
Right,
so
but Theresa May has said she's
yet.
going to put a motion tomorrow for MPs to vote on to call for a general election. Barry Gardiner and Jeremy Corbyn have said they will be supporting that. Will you?
I don't know yet because we haven't seen the detail of the Prime Minister's statement. I apologise if that's not good enough for you at this stage, but I haven't seen it. When I see what's on the table tomorrow, I'll make my mind up then.
Right. I mean, it's very straightforward. As you know, if a two-thirds of MPs in the House of Commons vote to call for an early election, that early election will happen. So all I'm asking, if that's the motion that goes tomorrow to you and your colleagues, will you vote in favour of it?
It's not clear that is, and there is also the option of vote of no confidence and an alternative government being formed.
Right.
So if that's what Theresa May wants, and as I said at the start of this interview, Theresa May has taken a big gamble here. We've lost Cameron early and Phillips early from the Conservative Party, and they lost Goldsmith in London because London and I opposed Brexit. So this is a gamble on the Prime Minister's part.
I take your point, but if that is what Theresa May asks for tomorrow, will you vote in favour of it?
I haven't seen what the Prime Minister's asking for, so this is just speculation. So let's see what comes up tomorrow, and you can see how my vote will be recorded in the public domain.
Right, fair enough. Barry Gardiner, it seems fairly straightforward, as we were saying it. You will be supporting it, and Labour have said they will be supporting it.
Look, absolutely. I understand. I've been in the position that Neil's been in before, where I haven't seen a motion. I haven't done the background. It's caught us all by surprise. So I understand his position that simply says, look, I'll wait and see. But the party's position is very clear, and that is that we welcome the opportunity to get rid of this Conservative government and to put our policies in front of the electorate.
And will the sniping stop the internal infighting in Labour, Barry Gardiner? Neil Coyle hoping it is.
Yes,
why has he been reported then to the Chief Whip?
Well, that, as I understand it, took place prior to this morning's announcement. But the point is this: I think increasingly what we've seen is that the party has come back together, and we had those two leadership elections. They're now past history, and the front bench has come back. It's operating properly, and actually people are now getting out there doing the job, both for the local elections and of course now for this general election. It's about putting policies there and persuading the public that this is in their future best interest. That's what Neil and I will both be doing, I'm sure.
Neil Coyle, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We can now talk to the Liberal Democrat leader, Tim Farron. He's in Truro and joins us now. Welcome to the Daily Politics. First of all, your response to Theresa May's statement. Hello.
Well, it's a fantastic opportunity for the British people to change the direction of our country, to vote for that change. Indeed, to vote against a hard Brexit and to vote to keep the United Kingdom in the single market, something that was not on the ballot paper last year. But it's also an opportunity for Britain to vote for a strong and decent opposition, something they do not have under Labour, but they can have with the Liberal Democrats. And as the Liberal Democrats are the only plausible path through which the Liberal Democrats could lose their majority, then the Liberal Democrats see this as our moment, a moment where Britain could change the direction of our country.
Right. Will people thank you for wanting to rerun the referendum and the whole idea of Brexit in this general election?
Well, I think the biggest issue of a generation is hardly not going to be discussed during this general election. And it seems to me that given that membership of the single market was not on the ballot paper last year, and people, whether they're for or against leaving the European Union, there seems to be a majority who believe that being in the single market will be good for our economy and make us stronger as a country, then to put that front and centre in our campaign seems to me not just wise, but showing real leadership that can actually bring the country together rather than divide it.
Just bear with us. Don't go away. I mean, Ian Duncan-Smith, how worried are you by the threat of the Liberal Democrats in the southwest, for example?
I'm not really, actually. I was down in the southwest during the last election, and there seemed to be a huge sense that time had been and gone, and we won all the seats down there, and we won them not just on issues to do with the coalition, but it was on issues to do who do you want to govern you. So I would have a sense that my colleagues in the southwest will get on and have a very strong election campaign and win. But, you know, to be fair, the Liberals have been very clear about what their position has been on this. I think it's an opportunity for them to put this case for a second referendum. If that's what they want to stand on, then let them put that at the general election, which is exactly the point. It'll be over pretty quickly, June the 8th. It's not going to spend too much time doing it. And then we can, as I say, end up with the mandate the British people want for the government they want to join them. But I have to say, listening to Neil Coyle, it was quite interesting, I thought, which is that I think the Labour Party kind of is divided here. There's some of them that want to have a general election because they want to get rid of their leader, and the other lot that want to have it because they want to win with their leader. And I think it's a really very divided party.
All right, Ian Duncan-Smith, at that point, I think we are going to let you go. Thank you very much for joining us today on this pretty special programme. Dramatic announcement from the Prime Minister. Tim Farron, back to you in Truro. What do you say to Ian Duncan-Smith? Doesn't seem to be worried or concerned at all about a Lib Dem challenge in the South West.
Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? I mean, we know that the results of the council by-elections we've had here over the last 9-10 months have been spectacular. The increase in membership here has been pretty much a doubling. So there's great energy down here, but it's across the whole country. I think what has happened since the referendum is that people, whether they supported or indeed did not support the outcome of that vote, they want to see a Britain that does not isolate itself from the rest of the world, that doesn't vote to make itself poorer. That's why being in the single market is of critical importance, and that's why it's one of those things we'll be campaigning on during this election. But it is also about changing the direction of our country towards one being that is open, united and tolerant. And it's also that opportunity to have a strong, decent opposition. The reality is that even people who are mildly favourable towards the Conservative Party will surely agree with me that we need a stronger Liberal Democrat voice through this election, given the Labour Party has given up on not only being an effective alternative to the Tory government, but even being a decent opposition.
Tim Farron, thank you very much. We're also joined now here in the studio by UKIP's Deputy Leader, Peter Whittle.
Hello, Jo.
Welcome to the Daily Politics. What do you say to Tim Farron, saying that this is the opportunity for those people who want to have a Brexit negotiation where we stay in the single market, for those who aren't in favour of what they call a hard Brexit, leaving the EU? The challenge is now on in this general election.
Well, yes, what I would say is that what you do know about the Lib Dems is that basically they are standing essentially on an anti-democratic platform. They simply won't accept the result. And whichever way Tim Farron dresses it up, if you want to basically go against democracy, that's the best way to do it. Vote Lib Dem.
Why is it against democracy?
Well, because effectively they have never accepted the actual referendum result. I mean, whether you say we want to have a referendum on the negotiations or even whether it's a second referendum, this is actually not accepting what was a democratic mandate.
Do you think it was necessary for Theresa May to call a general election?
No, I don't. I think it's utterly cynical. I think it is putting party before country. There's no question about that. What's interesting is that the Scottish nationalists were told that it was quite wrong to try and hold an independence referendum, inappropriate during Brexit negotiations. Somehow it's all right to hold a general election. But we're having one now, and my party is actually quite excited about it.
Right. I mean, are you going to win any seats, do you think? You haven't done very well up until now.
Well, the thing is that obviously 2 years ago, we got 4 million votes. Our votes were spread, very evenly across the country. We've done a hell of a lot of organising since then. We haven't been sort of quiet and just sitting on our hands.
But what would be the point of voting UKIP if it is framed around Brexit? You'd vote for the Conservatives, wouldn't you?
Huge amount. First of all, with this government, people are getting more and more worried that even though she has this sort of seeming kind of honeymoon, they hear nothing about what the government is going to do on migration. All they hear is, for example, things such as that migration at the current levels might well go on for about another 10 years. People are very concerned this is still the number one issue. They know where my party stands absolutely on these issues. Also, this is not the only issue. We've got other issues. Multiculturalism has failed in Britain. We have problems with radical Islam and extremism.
Right. Well, before we go to the Green Party's co-leader, what do you say to that about the issues of migration, multiculturalism? UKIP say they're going to hold the Prime Minister's feet to the fire in a way that you haven't up until now.
Well, I thought it was very interesting, and it may have been a slip of the tongue, but what you actually said was that this is the single biggest issue, and then you said it's not the single biggest issue. Look,
No. I said immigration is the greatest concern for most people, but the country also faces huge other problems, which none of the other parties talk about.
I think that the key thing that people are going to be looking to vote on is what is going to happen in terms of the economy, what is going to happen in terms of their livelihood, what is going to happen in terms of their jobs, if they feel that the sort of Brexit that you and the Conservatives want to take them down the road of, this hard Brexit that is going to stop free movement of people, stop immigration entirely.
That's what they voted for. They voted for an end to free movement of people.
By all means continue to talk, but then I should have a right to reply. They're going to vote for their future jobs and their security. At the moment, this is a government that has given people the livelihoods that they had back in 2007 10% worse in real terms.
I'm going to have to...
That is the key issue that most people
didn't just vote on economics, they voted on cultural things too.
Peter,
you underestimate that.
Thank you very much for coming in, because we must talk to the Greens co-leader Jonathan Bartley, who's been waiting patiently. Are you excited about the prospect of a general election on June the 8th?
Really excited. We've called for this. We feel that Theresa May is doing this long overdue. She should have done it before. And we are a party that is only really offering extreme Brexit, but also bold alternatives, an alternative to cuts, and fighting the government's programme of austerity. And we're going to protect the environment. And we are the antidote, of course, to UKIP. There's so much to vote for in the Green Party, and we're really excited about giving people the opportunity to do that.
Were you surprised by the announcement?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people we were surprised, but we've been calling for it. We wanted the Prime Minister to do it. She didn't have a mandate to force through this extreme Brexit. She needed to get the consent of the British people for what she's doing, because this is not on the ballot paper, what she's pushing forward.
On the basis of the polls, though, with Labour so far behind, if the polls are to be believed, it would then actually give and improve Theresa May's position to go ahead with the Brexit that she wants, rather than the opposition parties.
Well, if the last 2 years have taught us anything, is that things can happen very, very quickly, and there can be seismic changes very, very rapidly. And we are already polling more highly than we were at the time of the 2015 general election. Now, we would have had 25 MPs on the basis of that under a fair voting system. We want Labour, incidentally, to commit to a fair voting system so that we get real representation, true representation of the British people in Parliament. We're willing to work with other parties, and we could see a very interesting outcome, I think, in 7 weeks' time if those parties are prepared to commit to working together. But we are distinctive, we are different from Labour and the Liberal Democrats, and we're making that abundantly clear as well.
But you have just one MP at the moment, Caroline Lucas, on the basis of what you've said. She will vote in favour, of course, of that Fixed Term Parliaments Act going so that there can be an early election. What more impact can you have?
Well, we're optimistic about taking more seats, such as Bristol West, where Molly Scott-Cato is standing. And of course, Caroline Lucas has won that seat again. He won it in 2010 and in 2015. We have more seats than UKIP now, who've lost theirs. And we want a place in the leadership debates. And once people see us debating, they see the policies. We know that in general elections, our support goes up hugely when we get fair exposure in the media, across the BBC. And if we have that place in the leadership debates, we will have that proper democratic process where people can see what we stand for and vote for it. And, we're optimistic about making gains.
Right. Well, and as you say, you've had your fair hearing here on the BBC. Jonathan Bartley, thank you very much for joining us today. Let's continue getting reaction from all the parties and around the UK. Let's hear what the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, had to say.
Well, this is the biggest U-turn in recent political history, but it's very clear that the Prime Minister's announcement today is one all about the narrow interests of her own party, not the interests of the country overall. Clearly she sees the opportunity, given the total disarray in the ranks of the Labour Party, to crush all opposition to her, to get rid of people that disagree with her, and to give herself a free hand to take the country in the increasingly right-wing direction that she wants to take it in. And that would mean not just the hardest possible Brexit, but more austerity and deeper cuts. So now is the time for Scotland's voice to be heard, and for people in Scotland to stand up for the kind of country we want Scotland to be. And that's the campaign that I look forward to leading in the weeks ahead.
First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. Well, everyone's on election footing. Only took a few hours. Before we go, there's just time to get the latest odds with Jessica Bridge from Ladbrokes, and she's out on College Green for us, a breezy College Green. Take us through the odds, Jessica.
Hi Joe, well, hasn't Christmas come early? We're looking at the most seats betting here, don't forget, and the Tories are 1 to 10 favourites. That means right now, if you want to have a bet, you need to place £10 to win just one in return. So that's how sure we are with that. Labour, can Jeremy Corbyn spring the second political upset of his career? In a word, no, frankly. Labour are in there at 7-1, and this really represents a huge opportunity now for the Lib Dems and Tim Farron in the at 33-1. A lot of pundits are already coming for them because they think they can steal some seats and get on a bit of a march. Still a big price, but not a big price as UKIP, who are in there at 100-1. Obviously, Aaron Banks says he's going to challenge Carswell now, and that looks in disarray, frankly. But the bet down here, which a lot of punters will think is an absolute nailed on, and that 1-5 is probably a little bit generous. Jeremy Corbyn to be replaced as leader of the Labour Party this year. That's now 1-5. Those odds probably go to 1-10 by the time I finish this interview, frankly, because they're only in chalk, not even in ink. But Corbyn doesn't look like he's going to get much past June 9th at this rate, as far as the odds are concerned, with a Tory victory.
Right, well, let's get reaction to that from Barry Gardiner. Are you weeping into your tea on the basis of those?
Look, all of this, it's a great bit of fun, and people will no doubt have a punt, but this is not a presidential race. This is not America. We don't do things like America in terms of presidential impersonality. This is about policy. What we will be doing, what every Labour MP, what every Labour councillor and every Labour member, I hope, will be doing, is going out on the doorsteps and making sure that we get across the policies that we've been talking about, that this weekend were shown to be popular with people because they thought those were the things that really spoke to their lives.
Or because you have no faith in Jeremy Corbyn as leader, you're focusing everything on policy?
No, not at all. Don't forget, it's under Jeremy Corbyn that those policies have been put forward that found so much favour with the public just this weekend. We're talking about carers allowance, we're talking about as parents in schools. All of these things are really important in this general election.
Jessica Bridge, thank you very much. Thank you to you, Barry Gardiner, for being with us right to the end. The last man standing, it seems. Thanks to all of our guests on a very big dramatic day here in Westminster. General election will be called on the 8th of June. I'll be back at 11:30 tomorrow with Andrew. Bye-bye.
Judd Trump is one of the snooker stars at the table this afternoon, beginning his first round match. We'll be heading